decided to call it that rather than indie bats. So if you're here for the first time, we give you a warm welcome. I'm sure it's going to be interesting this morning, again, to learn about these things. Can we just have a word of prayer? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you this morning for fellowship together, and we thank you for the joys of fellowship. And we pray this morning, Lord, that as we fellowship together, that we might feel that bond of unity between us. And we pray, Lord, that what we hear today might be useful to us and practical to us in our church life and experience. And we thank you, Lord, indeed for the provision of buildings and for the fact that we can serve you in these various capacities. And so, Lord, we pray you'll be with us now. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay. We'll go over to whoever's happy number 2. By the way, in the toilets, the exits are there, and the toilets are just around the corner.
Okay, so again, thanks to Eric for welcoming us, and thanks very much to Cornerstone Church for accommodating us and even rejigging things when we realised that we'd got incompatible equipment, stuff wouldn't plug in where we thought it would plug in. Right, today we decided that we needed to do some trustee training and updating training, and while this has basically been sorted out by the Independent Rectors Association, we thought it would be good practice to widen the scope so that those of you who are church trustees will also have the opportunity to learn about current charity law, charity requirements, and get some training into your responsibilities as trustees. They're basically no different to our responsibilities on the association. It's just that you will be responsible for the activities at your local fellowship. So Mark Heaton, who is over the years has served as our auditor with his firm Cam Accountants, and currently acting as an independent examiner for the association accounts. Mark is giving the training, and this is basically an update of one that we did here just before COVID, February 2020. Mark will also be known to a few of you in this area because he preaches regularly at some of our churches. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mark.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I do remember that time 5 years ago, almost, when COVID was just some insignificant risk that was there.
No. Move your microphone away from your mouth. It's gone in again. Move your microphone out.
All right.
That's it. Yeah, no, you're all right, stood where you were.
Can you hear me without it?
No, you won't pick up on the...
Right, okay. Better?
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, right. Yeah, COVID was an insignificant risk. Little did we know that 6 weeks, 7 weeks later, the whole country would be shut down and plunged into deepest darkness for several months, and churches forced to close. As Brian said, I'm the independent examiner to IMA. I'm an accountant who specialises in local charities, and I also do a little bit of local preaching. I'm at Bonalswick this Sunday, tomorrow, and next Sunday as well, and also preached at Bethel, and then other local churches. But before you get your diaries out, I limit what I do. And then when so I do go to Padiham Parish, so St Leonard's in Padiham, It's an Anglican church. I'm not an Anglican. I have no idea sometimes what they do. But every so often the vicar will say, when he needs somebody on a Sunday evening, have you got a sermon up your sleeve? Which I always thought it was a bit of a strange thing to ask, but obviously you just have your sermons stacked up, ready just in case. Anyway, that's a bit about me. So we're going to talk about trustee. We're going to do a bit of trustee training today. I want it to be as interactive as you want to, as we can. We're having it recorded, hopefully, so that it is there for future use by other people as we can. I think being a trustee, I'm trustee of a couple of charities, and trustee and chair of the Association of Charity Independent Examiners, which it's great. It has its challenges because I'm chair, and that gives an extra responsibility, and anybody who's chair of a charity will know that sometimes it is difficult to try and keep everything under control. It's sometimes like herding cats, trying to get people together to a meeting and trying to get people to respond to emails. You send an email out to your fellow trustees, and it's like you never sent it. But then when you do get together and you do start working for the good, then it is always rewarding. I'm a trustee also of the Association of Church Accountants and Treasurers, ACAT, which I volunteered for that a couple of years ago when I went to one of their courses in London, and they were short of trustees. I'm not quite sure why. I tried to overload my diary even more. And also as a member of the Parochial Church Council of Paddy and Parish, I'm a charity trustee there. I'm also, for the Baptist credentials, as Company Secretary of the North Western Baptist Association. I know we have obviously, what do you call them? Indie Babs. A couple of churches that are partly Independent Methodist and Baptist. So that's my credentials, and I'm from down the road in Burnley, so that's even better. So next slide, please. I think you'll agree that charity, being a charity trustee, I think is a lot harder in many ways. A lot of work goes on in grassroots work and in local communities. But I think sometimes the charity world gets a bad press. And in recent months, you'll have seen Fashion for Relief. Anybody any idea who the famous person was in that got into trouble? Somebody called Naomi Campbell. And she got into, basically it was money that was being spent inappropriately, and she was a figurehead of it and thought there was nothing wrong. The one below was Captain Tom. Any idea what particular piece of equipment, of home equipment was used and was bought inappropriately? Not a walking frame, no. So after he died, there was a charity set up. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah, and so basically, after he died, there was all this money raised, and I think it was his daughter and her husband thought they set this foundation up and really spent money on stuff they shouldn't have needed to, things like a sauna and the like. And you do wonder who's advising people on this, why they would deem that as an appropriate use of charity spending. And probably very sadly this week, the whole charity world and the church community has been plunged into another issue all to do with safeguarding, and Justin Welby has paid the price because of safeguarding failures. And it reflects badly because once again the church is hammered in the press, and the good work that is done is almost ignored. But it does show you how charities do come up in the spotlight. But at the same time, there are a lot of churches doing a great amount of work in the community. My own church, we run the Christians Against Poverty Debt Centre for Burnley, Colne and Nelson. And that's doing great work. Three people, currently 2 people employed, and doing some great work. We have a food bank in Padiham, and there's lunch clubs take place in different churches, and so there's a lot of good work being done. But it's always important to understand what a charity trustee is there to do. And I think, especially in churches, there's probably more lack of training as to what really is your responsibility as a trustee. And we'll talk about different definitions in a few moments, but I think it's important that people understand what it is. So when I joined the PCC, the Parochial Church Council, which is the governing body in the Church of England of individual churches, and I was representing the CAP work, the 2 employees are actually employees of Padiham PCC. So the centre has to be part of a church, so Padiham PCC sits up there and they employ people. And that is something that's very alien to a lot of churches, actually properly employing somebody and understanding exactly what that means. And I think that's where, again, making sure that people are fully aware, or at least know where to look, or at least know where to turn when they're faced with an issue. But it is important that it is seen as a responsible role. And we'll all have situations where we see people who come to meetings and don't really contribute. And I think, again, it's important that people understand that when they're in a meeting, they're there together, and even if they don't say anything, it's important they don't go out of that meeting and complain about the decisions made because they didn't bother speaking up and raising their objections. So can I have the next slide, please? So as I've said, there's more headlines about charities and trustee failures. The Charity Commission do undertake investigations, and the next one, please. And a particular focus, and if you actually do care to read the Charity Commission and get the Charity Commission weekly bulletin, there are a lot of faith charities that do get investigated. And the ones, it's not just Christian faith charities, they're Muslim faith charities. You've got also Christian charities which have an African background. They get investigated a lot, and that's because you've got people coming from, say, Nigeria who have a certain way of working, and they expect that way can be worked here. So you've got all these different sorts of religious charities that do get investigated from time to time, and in many ways a lot more than non-faith charities. But, in my opinion, it's still rewarding. And next one, please. But the responsibilities are increasing and the numbers of trustees are falling. And as more responsibilities come onto you, and we know from an employment law in April 2026, which is only 15-16 months away, the amount of employment legislation that will be coming into play, the new employment legislation, is likely to be significant, and is one where most people can easily make a mistake, and I'm hoping that a lot of smaller organisations, businesses will be exempt from a lot of this, because the burden will fall quite scarily. And also the number of trustees is falling. How many people are trustees of multiple charities? Quite easily to get pulled onto 3 or 4. How many trusteeships do you have, Brian?
Just the 2.
Just the 2.
My church and the connection.
And the connection.
Sorry, association.
An association. Yeah, association. Yeah. So it's easy to be. There's numbers falling. The number of people actually wanting that responsibility, and also people having the time to do it. I think again that's another issue. One night ACIE, independent examiners, we tend to meet during the day in Manchester or London, but that requires you to have some flexibility as to how you get to a meeting, and you know, it's my business, so I can take the time out that I want to do. Whether I do it on a Saturday, I'm not right sure, but some charities meet on a Saturday because that's when more people can actually get together. I know that's what you tend to do, don't you? But in a world of more need, the numbers of people who actually stand up and say, yes, I will be a charity trustee, is falling. And also you got the age demographic, the age. You know, there's a lot of older trustees, and sometimes when you talk about a lot of trustees are, and I'm 60 now, so I can easily call myself still grey male. You know, that is still the demographic that is there in a lot of trusteeships. And what I read as well is that the more you sort of say that we don't need that, the more then people say, well, I'm not needed anymore, and then you've got a less pool of people to go against. So basically that's the background of where charity trustees are at the moment. More headlines, more newspapers, you know, you've got social media, can easily pick something up and run with it, even if it's incorrect. Faith charities, there is an increased focus on those, but it is still an important role to have.
You have to move to just move to the other side of the desk, really. I can't pick you up on the camera and read the screen.
All right, okay, right. So, just an overview then. So, and we've got definitions now. So, managing trustees have general overall control and are responsible for ensuring the charity is being run in line with its purpose or object. And next one, please. So, managing trustees may be known by other titles, and you might have directors. So, if you're a limited company charity, you have the role of a company director and also a charity trustee. You might call yourself board members, so you have a board that meets and the members of the board are discussing things. You might have governors, as in a school or some foundations or something like that. Or you might have committee members. Some smaller charities have a committee, you know, the committee meets, minutes of the committee meeting don't particularly call themselves charity trustees, but they still are. And then in the Anglican world, the parochial church council. But not a custodian trustee or a holding trustee. Sometimes people use that word, well, I'm a trustee. And I know personally, in a former church of mine, I was a property trustee. I was no longer a managing trustee or a deacon at that church. There were a few of us, there was a bit of an issue going on. A few of us thought we had a little bit of power over the charity. We had actually no power at all. I think we tried to stir it a little bit to try and get a bit of action, but we were told actually we have to follow as, if you're a holding trustee, you have to follow the directions of the managing trustees. Your role is purely there to be on the title deeds of a property. So again, sometimes people get those terms interchangeable. I think while I'm a property trustee, you've got to run everything by me. Actually, you don't have to run anything. The deacons or the managing trustees will just say, you have to do what we tell you to do. So who can be a trustee? That's the next one. So I think, first of all, at least age 16 of a company charity or a charitable incorporated organisation. Are you familiar with the term CIO, charitable incorporated organisation? Quite a few of yours converted now.
It's a possibility for us in the not too distant future.
Yeah, quite. So IME was set up in 1907 as a limited company charity, and if you were setting a new charity up now, you wouldn't automatically go down the limited company route. You would usually use a charitable incorporated organisation, and that is now the model that is used by most new charities being set up, the CIO. So others are what are called unincorporated bodies, so unincorporated associations or trusts. And the difference between a company and a CIO and a trust and association is one of limited liability. So limited liability is where if you are a trustee of a limited liability charity, one of those two at the top, then you are separate. You personally cannot be sued or responsible for the debts of the charity if anything goes wrong. If you are a trustee of an unincorporated body, which most churches tend to be, or were in the past, and some smaller charities, then if anything does go wrong, then you are responsible for the debts. And I was told about one church where I think it was down in London, this was a story I was told, where they had an employee who was acting inappropriately against the sort of teachings of the church. The church people, the church committee, the trustees didn't like it. They fired this woman, they sacked this woman. A bit later, this lady who'd been sacked must have been talking to somebody who said, actually, they shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have fired you like that. They should have gone through a lot more rigorous ways of dealing with you from an employment law perspective. And because the church was an unincorporated charity, the solicitor then sued the charity and its trustees individually, and saw money being there. So basically there were money that the trustees had, and sued the trustees. The trustees ended up having to pay some of the settlement out of their own pocket because there wasn't enough funds in the charity to settle that. So it's important that if you're employing people, if you've got buildings, that you do consider having limited liability status, because even though you might think it is remote, you might think actually we don't ever intend having employees, sometimes it's the inadvertent things that can actually come back to bite you. Whereas,
does that mean then that you would have to go through the same procedure for dismissing somebody if you wanted to company? Is that what you're saying?
yes, you've got to do it properly. Whatever you do, you've got to do it properly. And these trustees have done everything improperly. They just, it seems, fired this woman without going through it all and actually taking legal proper advice from an employment law perspective as to how to dismiss this woman. And you've talked through disciplinary warnings and everything like that. It took, from what I gather, you were talking quite a bit of time had elapsed between the dismissal and the actual case being heard. So, to be properly appointed according to your governing document, so if your governing document says that after 9 years you have to stand down and let somebody else take your place, then make sure that happens. Most actually don't really say, well, you stand down for 9 years and then you are, I think generally there's a gap that you can have between then and re-standing. I think if you stood down and said 10 days later, can I stand again? That's probably not the spirit of it. The spirit of having 9-year terms, which is a standard in the charity world, is to try and bring new blood on. Not always easy as. I think when I was chair of Association of Charity Independent Examiners the first time, from 2007 to 2015, I've been a trustee for a year before, and it got to the point of, towards the end of the 9 years, I could not see a successor for me as chair. And the Constitution said I had to stand down at 9 years. And one of the options being discussed was actually changing the Constitution to allow me to stand again, to remain on, which isn't a good thing. Thankfully somebody else came along and said yes, he would take over from me, which was a good thing. And then 4 years later I ended up back on as a trustee and ended up back as chair again, which was never my intention. So properly appointed to your governing document, whether it's your rules or your constitution or your articles of association, will tell you how your trustees are to be appointed. Then you have to be a person who's not being disqualified unless there's a waiver from the Charity Commission. So if you're bankrupt or IVA, or you've got an unspent conviction, say for dishonesty, I think convictions for motor offences and going through traffic lights and the like doesn't count, or obviously on the sex offenders register. So if you're one of those, you shouldn't really be a charity trustee. Which then leads to the next question: is should there be an application form for a charity trustee? I would say, I remember when I was in my first church, which was a Baptist church, it came to the annual general meeting and a piece of paper was put up on the board and people just signed and put their names against it, whether they were really appropriate for that. And when I joined the PCC 3-4 years ago, it was just, I was asked and then they found a couple of people to sign the piece of paper. I think nowadays, I think it's important that you understand what people are, you understand what other interests people have. And we'll talk about conflicts of interest later, but things like a job description. Should a trustee have a job, a deacon have a job description, or whatever you call them? Should they know exactly what they're signing up for? And I would imagine a lot of people don't do that. It might frighten some people off. Years ago when I was a Boys Brigade leader, Boys Brigade captain, I've been doing that for years and years, and then all of a sudden some new rule came in which said I had to have a job description. And I was aghast. I thought, but I've been doing this for so many years, why should I have a job description? But I suppose it's something that you say, basically, this is the role of a deacon or a member of the church council or whatever, that you have a specific description as to what you are there to do. So you know from the outset what is going on, as long as you don't frighten everybody away. That's the only thing. And doing an application form. I would say, well, if you want to be, let's do an application form.
Our system certainly at connectional level is slightly different. Yes, we have in recent years put together job descriptions, but the way things have always worked, and I guess they probably work in churches as well, is that rather than applying to become a trustee, you become a trustee by virtue of your role, which you've probably been elected to. So that being the case, in recent years we've asked that, like at connectional level, if churches are nominating people for connectional committee, which will then automatically put them as a trustee of the association, that those people ought to be made aware of what they're letting themselves in for. Because we have, in recent years, had officers who have suddenly thought, oh, yeah, I'm such and such an officer, but I don't really want to be a trustee. So that causes problems. So, I think the main thing is making sure people know what they're letting themselves in for.
Yeah, I agree. Because of the responsibilities involved. And also I think it's important that people understand that, rather than just thinking, it's something automatic. I'm going to be on the church council because I've been going to this church now for 5 years or whatever, and somebody says, can you go on it or whatever. I think it is important that people understand what their role is, because it is a role set out in legislation. And when you think about it from that aspect, then it is more making sure you get the right people involved. It's hard to do when there's a falling number of people. And also when you talk about roles, I think the treasury role is becoming harder to fill. more responsibilities on that. Probably secretary roles, maybe less so, but then when you think of what the secretary in my old church, a guy called John Taylor, who's been gone years and years now, but I think his role as church secretary in the 1980s would have been so minimal that, you know, compared to one in 2024. I'm not painting a very good picture of the trustee, am I? But it'd be fine.
Yeah. If someone's in a role, you mentioned about being trustee by role, definition of the role, that person takes that role, doesn't actually want to be a trustee.
It's up to the church, the rules of the charity, the church, to say what they believe the leadership team or the church council consists of. But I think that people like the treasurer, the secretary, should automatically be a trustee of the church.
Well, again, we actually had this situation in Astley where we decided our deacons, who, for our purposes, are people who provide practical support to the spiritual ministry, that's the way we described it. Our deacons would be by role, they would be trustees. Now, there was one lady who was a deacon, and she had actually acted as a charity trustee for another organisation in the past. She didn't want to be trustee again. So what we did, because we actually did have another deacon in the post, we've classified her as assistant deacon, which meant that she didn't have to become a trustee. So you can get around it, as Mark is saying. So certainly the particular responsible roles, then, you know, if people come into those roles, they have to understand the implications of so doing.
Does that answer your question? I think because in church council role now, or whatever you call the group, the secretary is quite important. It's not just a nominal job anymore. And if he's not part of if he or she is not part of the trustee body, unless you have a minute secretary who is just there to take minutes, that's a different person. But the secretary tends to be the one who tries to hold everything together and making sure everything's done, and again making sure that not everything is loaded onto the treasury, which I've seen happen as well. That does happen. There's a treasurer who gets a lot of the jobs. Oh, it's a treasurer's role. Charity commission stuff, treasurer's job. Nobody's interested. You know, and now, especially when the charity commission return has about 10 policies that, or maybe even more, that they ask you to have. And so I, as treasurer of the PCC, I didn't want it, by the way, I didn't, but I got it by default. That when I came to do the return this year, and I thought, I don't know where they've got this, I don't know where they've got that. So I emailed the vicar and the secretary to the PCC, nothing back. So I just had to come up with my own thoughts on what we should have and what we don't have. So it is a responsible role, but it is making sure that that people know what they're letting themselves in for. Which then turns us next to the role of trustees. So trustee duties. So we'll talk about conflicts of interest and decision making soon. But charity trustees make decisions as a collective, but decisions do not need to be unanimous. The majority rules. So if you have basically you have a meeting of the church council or whatever deacons, and as long as there is a majority and it goes by the rules, so some rules might say for certain things, calling a minister, say, or whatever, you have to have 75% or 90%, whatever. As long as you abide by the rules, you don't need to have unanimous. It doesn't need to be like that. which is fair enough, because there will always be some dissenting views. People have different views. Important to take note of those views, even if you disagree with them. But majority does rule. But when making decisions as a trustee, you must then act within your powers, act in good faith or only in the interest of the charity. Ensure you are well informed and in receipt of any advice you may need. Take account of all the relevant factors you are aware of. Ignore any irrelevant factors. Deal with conflicts of interest and loyalty, and make decisions that are within the range of decisions that a reasonable trustee body could make in the circumstances. I think when you actually read through things like that, it sounds quite straightforward, doesn't it? It's like a lot of stuff. It's good practice. We've been going through the book of Philippians at our church in the last few weeks, and a lot of it is very sound advice from Paul when he's doing that. But obviously, in the church in Philippi, must have been going against a lot of that he felt he had to remind them about. Actually, this is good practice, how you're supposed to act, and obviously they weren't. But acting within your powers and acting in good faith only in the interest of charity, that covers things like conflict of interest. Making sure you are well informed. How many times do you think people go into a trustees meeting and an hour before they then open the email? You don't need to be, don't upset Brian by your answering this. But how many times do you think people actually want to look at the stuff just before they go into a meeting? Yeah? How many times do you think the only stuff that goes out before a meeting is the agenda and the minutes of the last meeting? I think that happens a lot. So there's not enough information that goes out to enable people to sit and read and think about the role. During 2020, I got an email from some headhunters, and I don't get a lot of emails from headhunters at all. But this was to be on the audit committee of an academy school that I'd never heard of, I think in Oldham. It was unpaid, and they would have expected that individual to have spent around 10 hours a month on academy business, and that would be reading, preparing for meetings and stuff like that. I mean, I turned it down, and I thought, first of all, but I've no interest in that anyway. But I thought 10 hours, that's a lot of time to spend. But sometimes you do need to spend the time, maybe not 10 hours, but people have prepared the agenda for a meeting, they put all the paperwork together, got everything, thought through the agenda and what needs to be discussed. And it's important, if any papers go out, that they are read and understood, so that when you go into the meeting, you understand what is being talked about. Then you've got the time to think about what the discussion is about, what you're asking, what you've been asked to vote on, maybe, or not vote, or whatever to discuss. And that's being well informed. If you just open your email an hour before the meeting, you think, oh, I've got a trustees meeting coming up at 7 o'clock, and you just start there, you've had your tea, and then you start preparing for it, and then you look and think, oh, I didn't think we were going to discuss this. And that can then create some quite unharmonious discussions. And taking account of all relevant factors, again, thinking about it, if all you do is open it up an hour before, you're not going to have thought through everything. So, whereas if, say, you get the papers a week before, you can have a think about it and maybe just do your own research or ask one or two people or whatever. You've time to think through it and think, is there anything else I need to think about?
Just one question. If for instance, the trustees decide to new toilet in, which we did here. And for some peculiar reason, when it was put to the membership rate, overriding it, can a church meeting override the decision of the trustees, even if you're spending money? Because it's a practical question. It doesn't, I mean, it doesn't happen here, but I'm just saying, I could envisage.
Yeah, first of all, I think you need to flush the dissenters out.
What's on it?
You need to flush the dissenters out.
Yeah, our real thing says the final decision rests with the members' meetings, so that's all.
Yeah, I think sometimes you need delegated powers that the deacons have. They can spend money on such and such, and it depends how much money. If it's a brand new toilet room and bathroom and that's different. That's probably major expenditure. I think I would be trying to find out what the problem is before, if that's the case. Why is somebody not happy about replacing all that? Or,
Well, we'll do that. I'm just saying,
I think that first bullet point of the decisions answers the question exactly within your powers. So if your governing document says that the ultimate authority is with the members meeting and not with the deacons or not with the trustees, then that answers it. Although as Mark says, you've then got to look at the reasons why.
and I think that's the problem with churches more than other organisations, because you tend to have, and this is very much dependent on denomination. So for a Baptist, the Baptist church I used to go to, you would have deacons meetings every month, generally. You would have church members meeting maybe every other month, and generally the church members would be very well informed and lots of discussion going on. In the Anglican church, there's only one church members meeting every year. Totally different. There's a committee, but not a lot goes on in that, because very much the power lies with the vicar and nobody else. And I, as coming from a Baptist background, it's something I've never been particularly happy about, because I think it's important that if a church is to grow and to move forward, that the church members need to have a say in that.
So if you consider all those factors and then but the members disagree, you could overrule, couldn't you? Because legally you're in that, you're supported legally, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't want to do that, 'cause it's just going to create problems, but if it was that, you could do it, couldn't you?
Yeah, and sometimes it might be the deacons might want to sell a piece of land, and that obviously is an important one that would have to go to a church meeting. But then it's explaining why you think this needs to happen. And there's so many disputes within churches.
Isn't that called, a lot of that falls through not sort of trusting your church members, rather than just the deacons or the trustees. I think if you start putting things in, we go this, we go now, they're not going to trust you.
No, I agree. I agree.
I mean, there are things that trustees can make decisions about that without having a full board church meeting, but it's just differentiating which really need to be brought to the church.
Exactly.
And you do it common sense, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think even the Methodist churches they're not as democratic as you think, because you have church council, but you don't have, I think they meet twice a year or something, and your stewards meet more regular. But again, it's not the same. I think very much from a Baptist background and maybe IM's background, there's probably a lot more discussion and dialogue, that church members are a lot more informed than maybe some of the other established churches. And then you get the independent churches which can work very differently as well. I talk about some of the cases with the Charities Commission. that some of the African churches, it's very much, you've got the minister there who has absolute power, and that's what gets them into trouble, and things like that. So, I think when we're making decisions, I think if those 7 points are kept in mind, then everything should normally work quite well. Unless somebody has an agenda. I mean, sometimes people have agendas, personal agendas, and I think it's just making sure that people know what those are. So there are 6 main duties identified by the Charity Commission. Please. So the first one is ensuring the charity is carrying out its purposes for the public benefit. So a public benefit is something that came out, I think generally the words public benefit has been around for a long, long time, but in the late 1990s, when the Labour government came in then, and a lot of work was done on charity law and the like, and new charity laws came out in the early part of the century, which created a lot more. It actually brought stuff up to date, and things like public benefit became important. A lot of discussion, a lot of debate, because things like is a public school, is that there for public benefit or not? I mean, that debate is still being borne out today with the VAT issue, but it's there for the public benefit, and trustees must ensure the charity is carrying out the purposes for which it was established and for no other purposes. So if you've got a charity that is there, so we've got religious purposes, and that can be quite wide-ranging for the benefit of the public, that's quite easy. But if you've got something which is more narrower, you have to be careful you don't go out the parameters of what the charity is set up to do. And you have what's called, in your constitution, something called objects. That is the object of the charity. So it might be for helping disabled people or something like that. But you have to be careful you don't go out of that without actually going to the Charity Commission saying, look, our purposes are no longer relevant. So if you do encounter, say, some endowment charities that are set up in villages where maybe there's no village school set up anymore, and almost that role of that charity is redundant, then you have to start going to the Charity Commission saying, what can we change our object? But also you can have, you can almost with mission creep, you can say, this is what we're there for, but so we're going to do that and that and that. And then when you look at it, you think, actually, we're so far away from what we were set up to do, that we've actually gone astray from what the charity basically what we're set up for. I'm trying to think of some examples for churches where you might be doing something way out of the ordinary. So you might have a hall and you start doing a lot of conferences in a room such as this, and that becomes the important part of the charity when you're then using it to raise money. And you could argue there, is this a charitable purpose of a church charity? Things like that. That's where you have to be very, very careful. Is it part of what you're there to do? Or maybe you run the conference centre for other charities to use in your buildings. You have to be careful that that is not going against the sort of Christian aspects of your objects, what is in your constitution.
How would these things fit in if you were using on occasion your building to hire out for secular groups, just for small? I'm not saying major things, which you have done from time to time.
That's not a problem, I think. It's when you start becoming, say, a property owner, and basically you're renting out space permanently.
Yeah.
And it starts becoming much more a major part of what you're doing. That's where I think you could have issues. I think that there was one where it wasn't a church but another charity where you actually looked at the objects and it was basically just a glorified conference centre. nothing to do with what they were there for. I think it was there to help disabled people to start with. But then they just turned it into a conference centre. And sometimes there are tax advantages in doing that, and that's sometimes why people do it. But it's important that you understand, and also that you can't have a charity that is purely for private benefit. So it's having a charity set up for the inhabitants of a particular road or for a particular family. You know, trying to get, you know, Brian's charity for the benefits of Brian and his family, and raising money for that, and trying to get that through the Charity Commission, I think would be very unlikely, no matter what the aspirations are of his vast wealth and everything like that. And, but it's things like that, so it's basically there for the public benefit. And sometimes we have form charities. The Charity Commission have an annoying way of, I send the objects, the proposed objects for a new charity, and they'll twist it round and leave 2 or 3 words about it to make it so they're happy with it. You think, well, I said that in the first place. But that's what they do. So they have lawyers that do that. And there's quite a lot of, there's a lot of questions asked on when we actually register charities as to what it's all about. And there's a lot of questions. Is it very much for a specific group of people? What is the wider benefit of that church being set up? So if you are setting up CIOs, charitable incorporated organisation, they will ask a lot of questions. A lot of, when we registered Mount Zion, there were a lot of questions being asked on the application form. Sometimes they're asking the same questions 3 or 4 times, but it's understanding what it's all about, and that's avoiding the private benefit of a small charity. Saying, what is our wider remit? What are we actually doing as part of being a church charity? Next one, please. So, complying with the charity's governing document and the law. Now, what is a governing document? If the Independent Methodist Association, as a limited company, has something called the Articles of Association, and they've been revised. Probably they were set up in 1907, and probably only revised a couple of times since.
Well, we had a major rewrite in 2019, and have actually tweaked some of the words since then. Most recently, after that last annual meeting.
Yeah, I think sometimes I think one was the amount of trustees you have. You have to have like 20 or something like that, or, and if things like that are enshrined in your rule, in your Articles of Association or whatever, sometimes you actually need to change that. If you're not getting 20, you reduce it down to a manageable number. They're fairly administrative things, but it's making sure that you have a constitution or an article. So, Article of Association for Limited Company. CIO has a constitution. Some churches will have rules or something similar. Making sure you know what it is, making sure you know where that document actually is, and you should all have that somewhere. Because if you don't have it, how do you actually know you're working? How do you actually know you're following what the principles are of the church? How many deacons you're supposed to have? Are you actually bringing people in properly, or is it something that's happened over the years? Over the years, things have changed a bit, and nobody's bothered looking at your constitution or your rules and updated them. And I think sometimes it's important to look at them and say, do these actually mean anything now? Is it all old terminology? And I know when I took over as auditor, and we looked at the association's constitution, the articles, there were quite a lot of wording was quite old and clunky and not really relevant to now. And that's when sometimes to engage the Charity Commission to actually update it properly and get agreement to that. And they will always be open to updating it to make it more relevant and actually useful. The danger is if you don't make it relevant, you can end up actually no longer being in line with your object code.
Can you change your governing document without it going through the membership? And just change it to trustees?
No, it depends on what your constitution says. But generally, if you've got church members meeting, then you would have to take it through that. As part of the PCC, I think when we're putting an application in for some grant funding for the CAP Centre, they asked what your governing document was, and I think it's some legislation somewhere, which thankfully the grant funders ignored, but as a PCC, we don't have an actual governing document. It's some legislation or some Church of England rules, which I have no idea how some of these things are supposed to work. So, but if you've got a governing document, make sure you know where it is. Make sure it's up to date, so that it's actually workable. And if it's not up to date, bring it up to date. Especially say churches merged, you moved areas. If your church has moved from Nelson to Burnley, and you're saying we're there for the benefit of the people in Nelson, then great, because basically maybe a mission work has moved from Nelson to Burnley. But make sure your constitution is still relevant in that. And as churches do close or they do move into different neighbourhoods, it's making sure that things like that are kept appropriate and up to date. And also the combinations of churches. So probably not the case with the Independent Methodists, but I know that if a Baptist and a Methodist church seek to work together, then you have to have, I think it's called a local ecumenical partnership, which again is something in legislation to make sure you do stuff like that. So it's just making sure you understand, and also take advice from the people at the top, such as Brian and others, to make sure you know what you're supposed to be doing and can do. So make sure you act in compliance with the governing document, as well as charity law and other laws which apply to charity. So if you're thinking of other laws applicable to the church or to the Independent Methodist Association, what laws would you think apply to you? Employment law? Health and safety, yeah? Safeguarding, yeah? Yeah? Yeah. Fire safety, yeah, you've got all these things, and you have to comply with the law. Over a church, I think that's what used to happen, didn't it? Over a church, we don't need to bother with stuff like that. That no longer applies. You should know what your roles are. When do you have your electrical checks? When do you have a fire drill? I mean, I can't remember ever having a fire drill at a church. Or maybe we did once. And I think it took so long for people to get out. It took 10 minutes, cracking, half the congregation would have gone by there. But I don't think that happens very often. I think, is it hard electrical checks every 5 years? Do all churches get that done? Yeah, and again, it's finding people to do stuff like that. Just make sure, and employment law as well, like I said in the PCC, we have at the moment 2 employees, and as far as most of the PCC won't have had a clue, it's just, they work for CAP. But CAP is part of the activities of Paddy and PCC, and it's getting that understanding right and knowing their responsibilities. Sadly, the responsibility on that always falls on me, so because I'm the one who's deemed to know. And that's something we'll talk about later, is how people who have knowledge are supposed to use that knowledge properly in the context of running the charity. So the Commission advises trustees to take reasonable steps to find out about any legal requirements which may apply and take appropriate advice on such matters as required. So that's where, if you get an employment issue, then if you're unsure, seek advice. Brian.
Yes, probably worth mentioning. There's an organisation called CLAS, which is Church's Legislative Advisory Service. Now, this is an organisation which we, as a connection, subscribe to, and basically they have a small group of people in London who have a watching brief on legislation, and they put out a number of bulletins every year, which come to me and they come to a few other officers that have subscribed to them, and I sort of circulate them to other officers, and they basically tell us not only what legislation has come into effect, but also what legislation is planned. And on that, in that context, a couple of years ago, in the light of the Manchester Arena bombings, there was something which went through Parliament called Protect Duty, which basically puts additional responsibilities on organisations that were running public events. Now, one of the things that we put in a submission for, and other churches put in a submission for, was that, you know, to what extent would those duties devolve onto churches? Because Sunday services are a public event, and it seemed that, in particular, those duties could be quite onerous on a small fellowship, because they were being sort of expressed not in terms of the number of people attending, but the capacity. So if you've got a church of, say, 250 people, or with a capacity of 250 people, then you might have to adopt certain policies and appoint people to do this, that and the other. And if you're down to 24 regular attendees, then that was going to be quite onerous. So through CLAS, we did point out that this was going to be particularly onerous to small congregations in large buildings, and the legislation was ultimately amended. So I think certainly virtually all of our IM buildings would have only a very low level of requirement. But if anyone's in any doubt, get in touch with the resource centre and we can put advise you on what the relevant legislation is.
Would that be a good idea, Brian, when you get that information yourself, to pass on to other churches if it's relevant?
Well, I mean, I did actually write to churches over the Protect Duty, what they call a proposal called Martin's Law, because I thought it was so important that individual fellowships should have the opportunity to put their views forward to the consultation. Normally, I would only pass on the bulletins to officers, except those officers who I know are already receiving it. But if it was, I mean, the difficulty is that I might get one particular bulletin will deal with a number of issues. I mean, at the moment, we've got legislation going through about second homes and the extent to which council tax applies. Well, that is of no concern to the IMs, but it might be of concern to larger denominations where a minister has perhaps bought a home for his retirement, but is actually living in a manse, and so on. So all I can promise is if someone says, can I have the class bulletins, I'll send them the class bulletins. But it's a bit difficult for me to give the detailed filtering. But you know, we do look as best we can for issues which are likely to be of concern to us. And another one that's come up recently is
think of things like gift aid. You know, there's a lot of rules. In fact, gift aid seems fairly straightforward, but actually there's a lot of rules behind it. Is somebody employed or self-employed? Can have a massive effect if you don't understand. This week I got an email from somebody saying, can you pay me for being parish administrator? And I was sort of vaguely aware. I knew we were appointing someone, I knew who had been appointed, but my first question was, are you employed or self-employed? And I hadn't had an answer yet, because I wasn't at the meeting when it was agreed. But, yeah, am I employed or self-employed? I don't know. And you know, there's probably going to be a discussion had on that. When the CAP employees were looking at salary reviews back in April, and in my own business, in my own accountancy practice, somebody else dealt with salaries and making sure we were complying with minimum wage legislation. We did the calculations for pay rises, and then one of them said, actually, you're not paying us the minimum wage. And it was one of those, ouch, moments. And it's things like that. It's easy to get caught out and say, well, we don't have that responsibility of being an employer. But it's so important that you understand exactly what you do. You know, and if you've had somebody for a while and they are on page rate, have they got contracts with employment? Is it up to date? And again, these are things where it is so easy to get caught out. So it's making sure you know all these things, and that's why a secretary should only be part of the trustee body, because they're the ones who generally will have a lot of information. And also making sure there's some charities have a shared drive where all the information is kept, so they can act. So it's not on my email or somebody else's email, and when I finish, all my emails just disappear. In some ways, it's important that you have some central area where documents are kept and available for all trustees to look at.
Do you have to put a new employment contract if you change your name in the church?
You've got you just change. Not particularly. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would do. I would do. Yeah. Yes, I would do. Yeah. And again, it's also making sure that there's probably only one church I know as a paid minister. It's making sure you know what the rules are around payments of ministers and mansers and things like that. They're so complicated, but a lot of it goes back decades as to good practice or agreements with HMLC people that were 50 years ago, and don't touch that agreement because it actually works. Payment of council tax and water rates, things like that can be a bit of a, if you've got a man's, should council tax be paid by the minister or not? You can say. Alright, okay. So these are things, again, it probably doesn't always apply to you, but it's sometimes if you're talking to other people and in different denominations, there's different things go on. And also empty homes and things like that, and council tax and empty churches. Empty churches can cost an absolute fortune in council tax, in rates. And also there's been a revision in the register for rates as well, which again, it's knowing exactly what properties you've got and making sure that everything is up to date on that. And if you're renting houses out, if churches happen to have a house, making sure you know what things are with that. Before we have, to go to the next slide, and then we'll have a break for lunch. So, acting in the charity's best interest. So, this again is something that should be straightforward. So, trustees must make and act upon decisions that best enable the charity to carry out its purposes, considering both long and short-term effects. I think one of the criticisms of the government, probably in the last decades, is it's very much on the short term rather than the long term. Maybe if people actually thought, But what we're doing now, we need to be working on something that will actually benefit the whole of society within the next 10 years rather than the next 2 years, so we can get re-elected or something like that. But I think again, charities sometimes might do things that are there more for a short, we might think, okay, this sounds good what we're doing now, but think about the long-term effects of what you're doing. If you're employing people, making sure that you understand about redundancy. I was at a meeting this week and we were talking about fixed-term contracts, and that fixed-term contract was for 2 years, but after if it's a 3-year fixed-term contract, redundancy still applies. Whereas years ago, people used to think, if I've got a fixed-term contract, after 3 years, that person ceases employment, and they're not entitled to redundancy, stuff like that. Important to think about things like that. Your reserves policy, again, is part of that. What decisions we make on our building today might have a bad effect in 5 or 10 years' time. And many churches have ageing buildings, ageing congregations, and making sure that things are still relevant, still appropriate now when you're making decisions that will benefit the charity and its beneficiaries in a few years' time. And then trustees should avoid putting themselves in a position of conflict between their duties to the charity and any personal loyalties or interests to any other entity. And conflicts of interest, there is a Charity Commission document there which you can obtain from the Charity Commission website, and it's quite a good number of pages, about 30 pages long. And this is where things can get easily muddled up. So it's important that you understand, so with the trustees, what other things do they do in their lives? They might, are they part of other organisations or businesses that might actually benefit from what is decided in a meeting? And the thing with umbrella groups, say, I would call IMA an umbrella charity, not the prevent raining in of buildings, but because they are formed of representatives of different churches, is when they're in a meeting of the Independent Methodist Association Limited Company, they are there as a trustee of Independent Methodist Association Limited Company. They're not there as a trustee of Cornerstone Baptist Independent Methodist Church. They're not there as that. They are there, and not to try and influence everything for here. It's what is the overall aspect of what we're doing that benefits all of the association. Easy for people to get confused and come with their own agendas and what they want to do. Because it's important that our church benefits from all this instead of thinking about the wider aspects. And that goes for funding as well. Funding from, say, INF, is making sure that it's fair and understand to all churches. Can you just go to the next slide, please, and then we'll finish on this for now. So it's important that you identify conflicts of interest, and you can have financial interests, so maybe another charity benefits from it, or competing loyalties. Are you there? If people don't know what conflicts of interest are, you could be changing the discussion to benefit the other charities. So you must consider the issue of the conflict of interest, so any potential effect on decision making is eliminated. And how you do this will depend on the circumstances. And in case of serious conflicts of interest, it may mean the trustees decide to remove the conflict by not pursuing a course of action, proceeding with the issue in different ways so that conflict of interest doesn't arise, and maybe not appointing a particular trustee or securing a trustee resignation. That sounds a bit drastic, but sometimes it can create so much disharmony that you're better off that person no longer being a trustee, especially when you know that they have an agenda that's coming maybe because they are aiming to get a benefit themselves by influencing decision making in one of your meetings. And how do you prevent a conflict of interest from affecting the decision? Well, first of all, you've got to know what conflicts of interest they are. What charity are you a trustee of? If you're a charity, a trustee of something else, you should always, somebody should know what it is, so that at least they can recognise the chair. The chair and secretary should know. It's unlikely, generally, in church charities, but you never know.
Well, if you want, for instance, a trustee here that was a trustee of another Christian organisation, would that be a conflict?
It could, yeah, it would. As long as you declare it, there might not be actual conflict, but it's declaring it.
Again, we have practical examples of that with the connection, because every member of the connection committee is a member of an iron church. Now, from time to time, churches do apply to us for grants, and so the process is we, at the start of the meeting, we ask, are there any conflicts of interest? And for instance, if there was a grant from application for Darrell Creek, I'll use Darrell Creek as an example, then I would know immediately that Marilyn Riley has a conflict of interest. So when it comes to discussing that application, I ask Marilyn to step out of the room. The only occasion when she might stay is if the meeting needs to get a bit of information to clarify. But the procedure would be that if there is a conflict of interest like that, the person steps outside, there's takes no part in the discussion, and we record in the minutes that so-and-so had a conflict of interest and withdrew for that particular discussion.
Yeah. It's not, so it's not rocket science, it's not, but it's where churches can be moved in one direction.
Can the charity, like our church, donate contribution on a Sunday, which then goes to the charity? Can they donate to an organisation, like a program or something like that, from that?
Yeah, as long as it's within the objects of what you do.
Now, occasionally, with a collection, we're sending to a charity or something church.
Yeah.
Can you do that with your charity funds?
Yeah, as long as it's, definitely, yeah. As long as it's going to something that is linked to your, to being a church charity, Yeah, I think we're giving a donation to, say, a dog's charity. I would argue that's really not in the principles of a Christian charity. Unless, yeah. And then recording conflicts of interest. So again, some charities or schools, especially if you're governing a school, they like to know and will ask you to complete a register of interest, which says I'm a director of this, I'm a business owner of this. So at least somebody is aware of what potential conflicts might arise. And then as Brian said, recording conflicts of interest, so basically saying there is a potential issue that we need to look at, and noting that is important.
if your governing document's got words to that effect, and we particularly added the words through social action a few years ago, then a donation to another charity which would fulfil those objectives through promotion of the Christian faith, that would be acceptable. Although, dare I say it, a donation to the East Lancashire Railway, although it is a charity in its own right, probably would not be acceptable.
Probably be just.
Certainly would be.
Yeah, I think it's you've got a bit of money and you say we want to build a dog's shelter or something like that. It's not in the print. Even if 2 or 3 trustees are really into rehoming dogs, it's really not the wise use of money. Not that many churches have money that they can just throw around like that. And then also, it's also sometimes it's also disclosing in your accounts if there is what's called related parties. I'm a bit with churches and say IMA, Baptist, whatever. You can just go on and on and say, well, we've got all these people that they might benefit, their church might benefit from that. But it's safe if you've got so my Kane Business Solutions Limited, I'm a director of that, provides payroll services to the Association of Charity Independent Examiners, which is paid for, and that is disclosed in our account because that's a related party transaction. And it's things like that that you need to just be aware of, so that again, it's very much saying we're open about this, and that's when I think by hiding stuff that in the public eye things can get a bit messy. Right, I think we'll take a break there because I think I've got some interesting discussions about charitable incorporated organisations and VAT and policies. Just a point about policies. So, if you are a registered charity and your income is above a certain level, when you do your annual return, and some of this is definitely politically driven. I know that because of some of the questions they ask. But there are a number of questions they ask about policies. Some every church will have anyway, which is safeguarding. And you've got a number of policies that they say, do you have these? Yes, no, or not applicable. And some are a bit obscure as to what they really mean, but if you do actually look on the FIEC website, Federation of Independent Evangelical Churches, they do have a number of policies you can actually tailor and just have something there so you can say, yes, in my attitude is if you're working towards it, then that's good enough. But it's just something just to say we've got something to manage conflicts of interest and risk management and the like. So there is stuff on the FIEC website on church policies, which I don't think I found on the Charity Commission website or Methodist or anything like that. So, pardon? The Baptists have actually got some now. Oh, do that, okay, right. So there are stuff out there, but I'd say yes, no, not applicable. Just because it says the policy doesn't mean to say you actually have that. So if you don't have any investments, then you can just say not applicable. So reserves policy is about what money you expect to have in your charity bank account and stuff. So there's a reserves policy that the IMA has, and sometimes you might just put a paragraph in your annual report. That's enough for a reserve policy. If you've got something there for that, then internal financial controls might be how you monitor your own finances, who signs for what, and how many people actually sign checks. If you have checks, hopefully you don't have checks anymore. You do it right, okay. Things like that, and but you'll find stuff on there. But it's making sure if you don't need a policy, say not applicable. If it says, if you think yes, we do need one, then try and get something, even if it's just in draft form, for you to start putting together. That's my sort of suggestion on what to do with that. Okay, so we're going to talk about risk management. Anyway, can you try and get the PowerPoint back, please?
Yeah.
Right, okay, so,
That one.
yep, please.
Uh,
I've been brilliant, thank you very much. Really appreciate all your help.
Going to stand behind the desk.
Sorry, I've been told not to move about. So risk register. So a couple of paragraphs here. So charitable organisations are no strangers to the many hurdles that potentially stand in the way of achieving their objectives. As a result, risk management takes on an indispensable role in the strategic planning and daily operations of any charity. At the heart of it all is the risk register. And the risk register is a comprehensive document that records the identified risks faced by an organisation, assesses their potential impact and outlines the agreed upon risk management actions. And it provides a clear snapshot of the current risk landscape and the strategies in place to mitigate those risks. Now, I've seen risk registers that are huge and way over the top. But we're going to look at one that's an actual live one in a moment, which gives you an idea. But what risks does the IMA face? What risks do you think you face?
Fraud.
Finance is drying up, yeah? Anybody, anything else?
The structures of property, the property thing. If you live in an area where, you know, there's lots of landlords or something, will that count?
Property risk, yeah?
Reducing membership.
Reducing membership, I think that's probably a big risk, isn't it?
What's that, sorry?
Reducing membership.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Safeguarding issues.
Safeguarding issues, definitely a risk. Employment law, employment risks. Health and safety risks. Okay, so these are risks that in individual churches, individual charities will have different risks. I would say that probably a lot of churches, falling membership is definitely a risk. Actually getting office holders is a risk. You know, maybe in a few years' time, the IMA will be managing all the finances for all the churches. Sorry, Dan, I mean to say. But I know that, and things like that, you know, if a church struggles to find anybody to, sorry, if a church struggles to find a treasurer, what happens? If nobody wants to take it on, what happens? I know one Baptist church closed because they couldn't find the secretary and the treasurer. They couldn't find anybody as office holders. Yeah, you can use it, but we're not all that cheap, so we're not expensive, but
it's not actually a legal requirement to have a treasurer, is it?
no, but it's somebody needs to be able to manage the finances of the church. But it's not. It can, but you need somebody who will do that. And I think when you know, with online banking and more things by direct debit and gift aid and doing all those forms. I mean, gift aid used to be a form you filled in every year and sent it off. Now you've got to go online and do it all that way. But I say that's one risk that churches are facing, is who will take over, especially as the age profile of the congregation increases. And it's also making sure that on that risk is having somebody else who knows where everything is. So if somebody who is in one of those roles falls ill and passes away maybe, does anybody know where all the investments are kept? Anybody know, who the signatories are on bank accounts, their risks? So these are things that it might seem, he's done a few years, he knows everything is, but it might not be there. And so it's important to to understand what risks the church faces. So I'm going to ask for the Excel spreadsheet, if you can please.
Just want to give you that. Something that occurred to me where you're talking is that because most things are done online, most things are done by email. But how often is that email passed on to the church computer? You were saying that someone passed on, I've got information on my computer, but then the church hasn't.
Yeah, so what some charities do is got a Gmail or a Google Drive shared account where everything's kept. In my parish I've got an email address called Padiham Parish Finance, which in theory all the emails I get with expenses and invoices I can just hand that on to somebody else rather than a lot of stuff being held in different places. So yeah, and that's where maybe you have secretary at Cornerstone rather than your name, your own personal email address. It's a little bit of a palaver, but it means then that all the information can just be picked up by somebody fairly quickly. So right, so on here is an actual live risk register. It's not a church, but it is a community interest company, and it's got rented offices. It's got a board of directors with one who are volunteer directors, and a chief executive officer who's paid, and then a number of staff. So what's happened here is that we've got the risk title. Let's get some water. That's better. So we've got, on here you've got risk title, risk description, severity, and probability, and then a score. So here you've got, thank you very much. So we've got so staff risk, or a loss of staff. So basically, in the sort of charity world, there's a lot of funding is through grants that may be there for 3 or 4 years. And if you think about it, if you're working for a charity where the grant is there for 3 years, and 6 months before that time ends, you think, actually, this isn't going to be renewed. What are you going to do? Are you going to stick out as an employee the 6 months that you've got left? Or are you going to go and find another job? You'd go and find another job. So you've got a risk that all staff might leave for better opportunities, short-term contracts. And if that, so basically delivery will be compromised due to a lack of qualified and experienced people. So your severity is 5. Probability in the sort of not-for-profit world is quite high. I mean, at the moment you've got funding is reduced, so actually going for grants is a lot harder, and at the same time the costs of running things, with national insurance going up next year, so costs are going to go up as well. So you've got a lot of things happening which it's important to keep abreast of. So you've got things like that. It's basically making sure staff issues raised at board meetings, looking at salaries and things like that. And then if you go down another line, you've got staff resources. That's basically if a service isn't able to find cover for staff due to the expense, then your service won't be able to run adequately. Next one down, please. Reliance upon the Chief Executive Officer. Basically, if the Chief CEO is taken ill or something like that, a lot of things could fall apart. That would be a severe risk, especially if you haven't got a deputy or something like that. Next one down. Poor knowledge of legal responsibilities of an employer include protection of volunteers. And that's another risk, is the more things you do, what about volunteers? Do you have training of your volunteers? in churches. You volunteer, who needs to be DBS checked? And again, sometimes that can be a bit of a grey area. What about training the volunteers in? My wife helps out at our food bank, maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks, once every 4 weeks. And after, she'll go there for about an hour, but because you're filling bags with food and lifting them, after a bit, her shoulders are hurting. So you've got things like manual handling and stuff like that, which you don't think about with things like that. But and really this is something that should be, that should happen really, is your volunteers should be trained in all these aspects in lifting and stuff like that. So understanding what your volunteers are doing and managing them is as important as managing your staff. And make sure you're fully compliant with employment legislation. Then you've got building and other assets. So you've got fire and flood, you've all got buildings, some older than others. Is this easier to manage than an old building? Yeah. Still needs a lot of work to it though, doesn't it? So fire and flood, have you got, you would usually have insurance to cover that. But if you didn't have this, you'd just be able to find another church to worship in, wouldn't you? So your risk is minimised by doing that. And building faults, again, it's, how do you manage that risk? There is always a risk of a fault with the building. How do you manage it? And that's the whole purpose of this, is saying, well, what risk do we face? If you're no staff, you don't have an employment risk. If you have volunteers, you have volunteer risks. And it's trying to think, well, what do we do that means we need to mitigate that and minimise it. So training of people, understanding what people do. And it's hard work, it really isn't. And you go back to 30, 40 years ago, a lot of regulation wasn't in place. Now it is.
Could I just ask one question?
Yeah, go on.
If, we serve food here, we have a Wednesday lunch in the club. I don't know, would you have to be very careful with allergies and things like that? How would you...
Yeah.
Do you have to pay a match to put notices up? Because you're not responsible. Are you still responsible? I've always wondered about this.
If you go to, we go to Town and Garden Centre and into the cafe there, and they always they say, you order a coffee and they say, have you any allergies? You think, well, what allergies would you have if you're having a coffee? But they ask it every time. And me and my wife went to a restaurant in Manchester a couple of years ago, and it was a pizza place, and we asked, they said, have you any allergies? And because my wife was having, I think, a tuna pizza or something, but she said, oh, I've got an allergy against shellfish. And she wishes she hadn't have mentioned it, because the number of times they actually asked her, and they probably cleaned everything, even though she wasn't even going anywhere near any mussels or anything like that. But yeah, I think you are supposed to.
Yeah, well, you can have that. Well, what does the notice say though? Does it? Would you get allergies? That we are not responsible for animals.
We usually train with it as well. It's like if we get a case short, and we put it as a trainer. Usually notice there is a trainer goes on with it.
Mm-hmm.
You hear all sorts of things on planes about.
Yeah, you do, yeah. So yeah, things like that. Services, that's maintaining client confidentiality, deal with a lot of vulnerable people. Obviously, if somebody's having discussions with somebody, that's probably fairly low risk for yourself. But safeguarding is always a risk in a church, and it's making sure people are trained properly in that and understand it properly. For that organisation, I'm the director, and for a grant from Henry Smith Charity that the organisation applied for, they actually said, we want all the directors DBS checked. and to have undertaken some safeguarding training, which I think it was a bit of a surprise to them that they'd never asked that before, and also because the non-exec directors are not, we don't see anybody like that, but they asked for it. The first attempt I had this online training, I think I got 68% and failed. So I got another attempt and got 81%. But it wasn't, again, fairly generally straightforward questions, but it's something that needs to be done, and making sure that people that know what responsibilities are, and probably I think actually having it on the agenda at every church meeting or every deacon's meeting. Are there any safeguarding issues? Waiting lists, again, that doesn't really affect yourselves, relationships with funders. If you've got grants, again, it's grant funding. If you're expected to report back to a grant funder on how you spend some money, then make sure you have a diary note to do so. Administration, office electrical equipment, health and safety, public liability, and employee disaster recovery. Then financial risks, inaccurate and or insufficient financial information, making sure you know where things are, making sure you can manage your cash flow. If you start running out of cash and you don't say anything, then you can end up with some real problems. And I think that probably is more or less it on that. Is there, governance risks, board effectiveness. So is the diaconate effective in running the charity? The deacons, as a group, are you effective in running the charity? Or are you ineffective? And do you have enough people with... And then, again, that's an interesting one there. You've got, if there is insufficient number of directors, or insufficient skills, experience and connections to the organisation, then decision making could be inhibited. And that's where, instead of being this automatic right to become a deacon or on the church council, whatever, that sometimes you actually seek somebody who has got specific skills you would need. It's not always easy to find, but on that one, we've got somebody who's got safeguarding levels 1, 2 and 3. He's the safeguarding lead on the board. And I'm the accountant on the board, so that's my role on it. So it's just things like that, making sure you've got the right skills or the best you can on the church diaconate. Hard to do because you find the people in the first place, but try and do it. Try and make sure. And if you don't know, if you don't have somebody, then make sure you know when to go and ask questions outside and be prepared to pay for the advice as well. And that's equally important. Right, okay, so to go back to the PowerPoint, please. Right, so we talked about a risk register. Next slide, please. And that tells you about how, risk identification, risk analysis, evaluate it, what do you do to mitigate it. So fire and flood, one of the mitigations is also insurance as well. The church doesn't burn down. Who is responsible for that risk? So you're saying secretary, treasurer maybe, or property steward or whatever you have, something like that. And then also making sure that it is regularly reviewed. Which a lot,
Is this a legal requirement to have a risk register?
It's good practice to have a risk register.
Yeah.
Being actually having risk management is a requirement.
What did you say?
So having a risk register like that,
Yeah.
it's not a legal requirement, but having risk management is. So thinking about risks and documenting those. You don't need to go into a fancy spreadsheet with lots of nice colours and formulas, but as long as you say what risks do we face, risk management is important. So when you talk about having a lunch club or whatever, make sure those risks are thought about before you do it, and document it, and review it on a regular basis.
Does that have to be displayed? Like a safeguarding policy document?
No, it's just something you keep within the managing trustees domain.
How would someone go on with all these things if they weren't a registered, if they were a church but not a registered charity, would they still come under those things?
If you're a church which is not a registered charity, so you are a charity accepted from registration, which is a lot of Methodists are, smaller Anglicans, still a lot of Baptists are accepted charity. You still have to comply with charity law, even though you're not a registered charity. Yeah.
Which would also apply to churches whose annual income is below the threshold.
Yeah.
You have to have an income of 510 a year before you're obliged to register. But as Mark says, whether you're registered or not, you are still subject to charity law.
Crazy world, isn't it? But yeah, and keep it under review. So maybe every year you look at the meals, the way you do the meals, and say, is everything appropriate? Is everything right? You know, do we need to make sure that every year we document the fact that we've checked the cooker, the microwave, you know, your cooking, your cooking skills, and you know, have you been on, you know, what level, you know, what certifications do you need, things like that. But document what you need and regularly review it. Because again, if anything happens, training standards or whatever would come and say, well, what procedures have you got? That's important, you know. Like I say, if you're running a mums and toddlers group and you're moving a lot of play equipment around, you need to make sure that the right people are lifting. It's all the lifting. It's sometimes easy to take volunteers for granted, whereas employees might have a different attitude to stuff. But it's easy to take volunteers for granted, and I think with the age profile of churches, and still what I say is with the greatest respect, all the people are doing, it's still a lot in churches that could put them at risk of injury or whatever, because they do everything because they want to do it in the service of the Lord. Okay, next, please. And we talked about that. Next one, please. Then act with reasonable care and skill. So we're coming to the end now. Trustees should make use of any skills or experience present on the board, and as always take the relevant advice on matters that require expert knowledge or assistance. So again, if you don't have anybody on your trustees who has got food handling skills and understanding all that, you know, get some, you know, pay for someone to come and give you some advice. You could probably get that provided locally for not a lot of money, or do make sure people go out at the food standards course and bring that in, or even better, get someone to bring it in and do it for you and invite everybody to come and do it. It's HR, if you're going to employ somebody and you don't have anybody on your board who's got understanding of HR issues, you know, definitely get somebody to ensure you're doing everything properly. Make sure somebody understands minimum wage regulations and things like that, because if you don't, that's where you could get unstuck. Sometimes when things are going well, it's not always a problem. When things go wrong, that people have no compulsion about throwing it back at people, saying we should have done this, this and this, when they know quite right that people are doing everything in good faith. So yeah, and you know, accounts and gift aids, and gift aid changes or something like that. Gift aid is another issue where if you don't keep it's easy in a church where you've got a finite number of donors, but the way that tax has yo-yoed over the last few years, from people being able to have £17,000–18,000 and pay no tax because of their construction of their income, to now people being dragged into tax because personal allowances have stayed the same and state pensions have gone up and that. You know, are people who are gift aid donors now, 10 years ago, are they still paying tax? If they're not, you're claiming gift aid incorrectly. So again, it's understanding things like that. And you know, people are generally good on that. The bigger charities, the onus is on the individuals to say, I'm no longer a taxpayer. But some people might not even remember they've signed a gift aid form. So there's things to think about. And that's what being a trustee is quite hard, because you're expected to know a heck of a lot on no training at all. So that's why this is really good.
Can you tell me, this is important, I don't know the answer to this question fully. We claim tax back for covering the digging in Lancaster Church and also GSD. How do you work out the GSD?
Gift aid small donation scheme.
Very inexact science to me, you know, those the offerings that...
Yeah, that's, you've got a limit on what you can claim. I think has it gone up to £30 or something like that?
Yeah.
But also it's a percentage of what your overall giving is as well. But yeah, you put the information into your form and then they'll reject it if it's not right. So
yeah, it seems a very inexact science, you know.
it's just rules that are in there. It's just it's understanding them really.
Tell you what I do. Fortunately, most of the bulk of our income actually comes in through standing orders. So, some of this is covered by gift aid declarations anyway. Gift aid small donation scheme only applies to cash, and it's only up to a limit of £30. So, when I have a look at the offerings, our offering is put in a box with a slot in it. If I see, as I might do on occasions, an envelope with 5 £20 notes inside the box, or let's say 2 £20 notes and a £10 note that have obviously been folded together, I assume that money has come from one person, and because it's over the £30 limit, I can't claim it. And I'll look at the rest of the cash, make a note of how much that is, and then, because I do my accounting with an Excel spreadsheet, I put a code of offering cash stroke small gifts or something like that, and then just go through the year and the month. But yeah, you have to be aware that not all cash gifts are reclaimable. And so if someone has missed church for a month, they normally put in, say, £10 a week, and then because they missed church for a month, they'll put £40 in. The way the regulations are drafted, I can claim, if they put in £10 every week, I can claim it. If they put in £40 one week and nothing for 3 preceding weeks, then I can't. But really, it's a question of looking at what you've got, whether it's a complaint, or a box. It's obviously helpful if it's in an envelope, so you have no doubt. And if in that package there's more than £30, then you have to discount it.
These are the things you're expected to know. And gift aid is so vital to the financial health of churches. But yeah, making sure that you know that whether your donors are...
You've never had any trouble.
Yeah. I think I've heard that a charity reclaimed tax from somebody who had a gift aid declaration in, but then because when you fill the form in, you put the name and the house number and postcode, there must be a random check against those. Maybe a random check with larger amounts, and they check to see whether or not the tax was paid on that, and then actually made the individual who signed the form pay that back, even though the church had received the money. I think it's very rare. It is probably very rare because I don't think HMRC have the staff or the systems properly to do it. But that doesn't excuse us from doing it.
And in fact, the declaration that you signed,
Yeah.
it does say that if you haven't paid enough tax to cover, then it's your responsibility.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Crazy. So yeah, take advice. If you don't know the answer, then find somebody who does, who knows the proper answer. And then I talked about this duty extends to trustees committing to their role, preparing for and attending trustee meetings. And I know some trustee bodies only meet say 3 times a year, and if you're a trustee who meets in meeting 1 of the year, misses meeting 2 and then attends meeting 3, which is say 4 months gap, it can be quite hard if you miss out, because then you're thinking, well, what went on there? But unfortunately, any decisions that are made in the meeting that you're not there, you just have to accept, because it's that meeting that's making the decision. And if you are not able to, if you've had adequate notice of that meeting and you don't attend, then that's the way it is. And I know the larger boards, where you maybe have 20 odd on a charity trustee, which is a huge amount. I mean, you used to have 20 odd, didn't you? Is the likelihood of people not being there is high. And also, people who aren't there might be different groups of people. So trying to keep track of what's been decided is quite difficult. Whereas I think in some ways a smaller group of trustees is far more easier to manage and easier to get people together at short notice. I think you agree with that, Brian. Easier to get people together, say 2 weeks' notice on a Zoom meeting is say 10 people rather than trying to get 20 people in a room together. Next one, please. And ensuring the charity is accountable. So statutory accounting report requirements can be stringent, and trustees must always be able to demonstrate that charity is compliant and adhering to such guidelines. So again, making sure your annual accounts are done and filed and done in the proper way that is required. And is there a next one?
No.
No, that's it. So I think that's basically, I think I've covered a lot there. My voice is fading now and I'm preaching tomorrow morning, so any more questions? I think, the point I think of being a trustee, it's an important job, but I always think it's a rewarding job. It can be, I mean, some people here have been a charity trustee in some form or other for decades. But it is a rewarding job.
What's the minimum number of trustees you can have in a church?
The standard for a charity is 3. Yeah, as long as you have 3, at least 3, that's fine.
It depends. If you're on the 1894 model, it'll say that you must have 6. I know a number of churches did make the association a trustee, not a custodian, but the association was made as a trustee, just so that they got ultimate cover. Again, if you're on if you use the more recent model governing document, which some of us were talking about over lunch, it will specify who your managing trustees or office bearers, as the words you use in our document are.
the Methodist, the local Methodist circuit, because of the way they are structured with 15, 16 churches and offices and that, technically they could get up to about 80 trustees in the local, this local Methodist circuit, because of the way that the Methodists work. And it's impossible, I think, for so many to be making routine decisions, so you'll always end up having to delegate to a smaller group. Yeah. Okay, I hope you find that that useful, and we'll make that recording available. Do you want Dorothy, do you want to pray?